Hi, this is Paul Lascano, Director of Tennis at Hammock Beach Resort, and this is your USTA Florida GoPro tip. One of the most critical parts when a player starts to play tennis is to have the right strings. Nowadays, one of the most popular strings that professional players are using is called the polyester or poly string. Polys have an added benefit which actually helps the player hit with more spin, provided that their strokes are already hit with spin to begin with. Also, another added benefit is it has very long durability. On the downside, the longer durability also affects the tension, as polyester strings do not retain the tension very long. Another side effect for some players that use polyester strings is they're very prone to injury because of the stiffness of the strings. When using a polyester string, sometimes it's very difficult to know when it's time to have your racket restrung due to the durability of polyester strings. Normally with polyester strings, we ask that you string your rackets even before you break them if you're not a frequent string breaker. The main reason is because polyester strings do not retain the tension too well. So for example, if you typically string your racket at 55 pounds, usually 7 to 10 days later, you've lost about 5% of the tension in your racket. If you leave it in your racket for too long, the racket could be very, very loose and become very springy. So even if you're not a frequent string breaker with polyester strings, we do recommend that you string them at least every 2 to 3 weeks. For most club players, we typically recommend they use a synthetic string or a multi-filament string, such as synthetic gut, something that's a little bit softer. It'll also give them a little bit more playability. One of the downsides, however, of using a soft string is the durability factor. So for players that use a lot of topspin, they probably aren't getting a long lifespan for their strings. Depending on how many weeks they play, a softer string for a player that uses a lot of topspin probably can last them less than a week. If they're not breaking strings that frequently, we suggest that a player strings their racket as many times a year as many times as they play during a week. So for example, if you play 7 days a week, it's recommended you should string your racket 7 times a year. One of the easiest times to know if you're using a synthetic gut, if it's time to restring, is if you notice the strings have a lot of movement. If you notice you're adjusting your strings very frequently, you might be due for a restring. Also, sometimes if you look at the string, you'll notice some fraying. If you're noticing some fraying on the string, we usually recommend that you change your strings.